Welcome back to SpookyShade, where the shadows speak and forgotten horrors rise from the deep. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and prepare to descend into darkness. We had crossed the threshold of the knowable, descending into a realm that does not belong to mankind. Outside the steel shell of our submersible lay an endless blackness, a depth that devours not just light, but sanity itself. Wordless whispers passed through the hull, fleeting shapes drifted beyond the edge of vision, and doors that should not exist began to open. In this next chapter, Descent into the Hollow Deep, join me as we plunge into a seabed beyond rescue, beyond signal, where only ancient truths wait to be awakened. And one by one, we began to hear its call. Chapter 3, The Signal Beyond Memory. At first, it was just a curiosity, a strange anomaly, something we all dismissed with tentative glances and quiet whispers. The door was small, inconspicuous, embedded in the wall of the submerged structure like any other feature of the ancient wreck. But something about its presence, even in the cold, dark silence of the ocean depths, began to gnaw at me. And then the whispers started. At first, it was just a hum, almost imperceptible beneath the usual mechanical noises of the submersible. But soon it became more insistent, more demanding. The frequency of the hum increased, the pitch rising with every passing second. And with that shift came the pressure in my chest, the way my breath began to falter when I looked at the door. It wasn't just a door. Not anymore. Couldn't be. The markings. No, the symbols etched across its surface glowed faintly, pulsing in rhythm with the growing hum, and every time I reached out to touch them, I felt my fingers trembling. The others must have felt it too, but no one spoke up at first. Turner, always the stoic, was the first to approach it. He brushed his hand across the surface, just like I had, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't quite right. But he said nothing, just stepped back and returned to his station, as if nothing had happened. Still, the door lingered in my thoughts. The feeling that I had to open it, like something was waiting for me on the other side, waiting for us, began to grow stronger. And then, one day, we found something. It wasn't much, just a small piece of metal, wedged into the crack of the doorframe. But when we pulled it out, the piece fit perfectly into a slot on the door. The moment it slid into place, there was a sound, a deep, reverberating groan from somewhere within the structure. It was almost as if the door itself was breathing, stirring after millennia of slumber. I don't know what I expected after that, but it wasn't this. The moment the mechanism clicked into place, the door opened, and everything changed. It wasn't a gradual opening. The door didn't creak open, revealing a dusty, dark chamber as we all assumed it would. No, it was as if the door was never truly closed to begin with. It split down the middle, the walls around it buckling as though some invisible force was pressing in from the other side. The air around us grew impossibly cold, and the faint, flickering lights of the submersible blinked out, plunging us into an unnatural darkness. And then there was the sound. It wasn't the crash of metal or the groan of old machinery. It was something else. A low hum, vibrating through the bones of the station, vibrating through me. I could feel it in my chest, rattling my ribcage like a drumbeat from the deep. But it wasn't the hum that terrified me. It was what followed. A voice. It didn't speak in words. It didn't need to. It spoke through feeling. A presence pressing against my mind, like a fog creeping into every corner of my thoughts. I could feel it, swirling around me, like it was trying to reach inside, trying to pull my mind apart. "We're here," it whispered. "You're here." I tried to pull away, to look at my team, to ground myself in the reality of the situation. But when I turned to face them, their eyes were vacant, empty. They stared at the door with the same hollow look that Turner had earlier, their faces expressionless, as if they were no longer aware of anything outside of it. "You have to open it," Turner's voice came, barely a whisper. I didn't understand. Not then. But I couldn't deny the pull, the compelling need to approach the door, to walk through it, to see what lay on the other side. My hand was moving of its own accord now, and I couldn't stop it. It was as if the door was waiting for me, waiting for all of us. I felt the cold again as my fingers brushed against its surface. It was alive now, or at least it felt alive. Like it was breathing beneath my touch, exhaling in a way I couldn't explain. The symbols on its surface rippled and shifted, warping before my eyes, rearranging themselves into patterns that seemed familiar but couldn't possibly be. I heard Turner's voice again, clearer now, as though he had crossed some invisible line. "We're chosen," he said. His tone was no longer that of a man. It was something deeper, older. "It's our purpose. We have to open it." And as I stood there with my hand pressed against the door, I realized that I could no longer say no. Something was pulling me in, something I couldn't resist. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling, and the instant I touched it, a jolt shot up my arm, cold, sharp, like electricity. The pain didn't stop. It only spread, infecting my body, taking control of my every nerve. My muscles locked, frozen, as though the door was forcing its will into me. I heard the others behind me, muttering, chanting softly under their breath. Words I didn't understand. Words that didn't even sound human. "Open it." This time it wasn't just a command. It was a need, a requirement, something I could no longer avoid. Something I didn't want to avoid. The door began to move, slowly at first, then faster, and I felt it. Felt it as it began to pull everything toward it. The air around us vibrated, the walls groaning under the pressure, and I couldn't see, couldn't think. The door wasn't opening anymore. It was tearing, ripping apart reality itself. I don't know what came next. I don't know if it was the door opening completely or if it was something else entirely. But the moment it finished, the world around me shifted. Time didn't make sense. Space didn't make sense. It was as if the very fabric of the universe had been ripped apart, and all that was left was the darkness. The others were gone. At least, I think they were. I don't know. I can't focus. The whispers have drowned everything out. And all I can hear now, all I can feel is the door. The thing beyond it is calling to me. It wants me to join it. I am its now. When the door opened completely, a vast, dark space swallowed us whole. All I could see was infinite blackness, no depth, no beginning or end. It was a sensation I couldn't describe, as though space itself had been warped, as if time had lost all meaning. We stood there, staring into that endless dark void beyond the door, and I felt a coldness sink deep into my bones. It wasn't a physical cold, but a cold from a place beyond human comprehension. A cold from something that could touch every thought, every memory we had. No one said anything. No one could. Turner stood beside me, staring into the dark space with vacant eyes. His gaze wasn't just distant. It was empty. He looked as though he had lost all sense of self, as though the door had consumed him. We all stood frozen, like marionettes, unable to break free from the pull of whatever lay beyond. Then, a sudden sound broke the eerie silence. I turned, barely registering it, just in time to see Helen, always the cautious one, huddling in a corner. She was pointing toward the blackness, her voice trembling with fear. "There's someone there." I saw nothing, but her words carried a weight of dread that I couldn't ignore. We stood there, motionless, as the dark space seemed to watch us. And then, the light from one of our devices, a portable projector, flickered to life. The powerful beam illuminated the darkness, and as it made contact with the void, everything began to change. Strange shapes emerged on the black canvas, figures that defied description. They writhed, contorted, as if they were not three-dimensional but existed in a way that transcended the limits of our reality. "We have to shut it," Gorman's voice broke through, but there was no confidence in his tone. "Don't let it get out." But it was too late. The strange images in the darkness became clearer, and I realized that they weren't just phantoms. They were something real, something tangible. And then another sound filled the air. Not from the door, but from inside my head. A whisper, a voice that was not human. "It cannot stop. Everything will unravel." That voice was not from any of us. It came from somewhere else, from something we could not understand. I felt it. felt it trying to reach into me, like fingers scraping across my thoughts, pulling at the very fabric of my mind. "You are here," the voice continued, but not with words. Pressed into me. "We are waiting for you." I tried to pull away, to look at the others, to anchor myself in the reality of the situation. But when I turned to face them, their eyes were vacant, empty. They stared into the door with the same hollow look Turner had worn earlier. No one seemed aware of anything except the door. The whispers continued, and my hand, against my will, moved toward the door. "We have to open it." Turner's voice came again, barely a whisper. I didn't understand. Not then. But I could no longer resist. I couldn't stop myself. My hand reached out, trembling, and as my fingers brushed against the door, it was like a jolt of electricity running through my body. The coldness took hold, sharp and painful, spreading through my veins. But I couldn't pull away. I couldn't stop. The door moved then, slowly at first, then faster, and as it did, the walls around us began to creak and groan. The sound was not from metal, but from something far deeper, like the very bones of the earth were shifting, giving way to an ancient force. And when the door was fully open, we knew it was too late. As we stepped into that darkness, I realized we were no longer inside the station. We were no longer in a place that obeyed the rules of our world. The space around us seemed to stretch and warp, like reality itself was bending in ways that defied logic. Each step I took felt heavier, as though there was a force pulling me backward, urging me not to continue. The cold that had radiated from the door had followed us, and now it felt like it was inside me, gnawing at my bones, at my very being. I turned to look at the others. Gorman had vanished, not in the sense of being lost, but as if he had never existed. There was no trace of him. Just emptiness. Turner remained, but his voice had changed. It was softer, hollow, and as he muttered under his breath, it was clear that he was no longer the same person. "We're chosen," Turner said, his voice distant. "We have to go through it." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. But I felt it, a deep, primal instinct that we were no longer in control. The door had opened, yes, but something else had taken hold of us. We were being chosen for something, and I could feel the weight of that choice pressing against my chest. My mind was swirling. I could hear whispers, voices in languages I didn't know. They surrounded me, suffocated me, and I realized that we were no longer part of the world we once knew. We had crossed a boundary, and now we were standing in a place that existed outside of time, outside of space. And as I turned to look at Turner again, his face twisted in a way that didn't belong to a human. It was something else. Something far older, far more hungry. "We have to go through it." The voice was insistent now, and I felt it deep in my gut. We had no choice. And then, as if driven by an unseen force, we moved forward. We were no longer walking on solid ground. The world around us had dissolved into a formless, shapeless expanse. There was no longer any up or down, no left or right. It was as if we were suspended in the very fabric of the universe itself, hanging between dimensions. The cold grew sharper, more invasive. It wasn't the cold of ice or water. It was the cold of the void, of the spaces between stars, of places where time did not flow, where reality did not exist. And then we saw it. It wasn't a place, not really. It was a presence, a being, an ancient entity that seemed to exist in the very void of space. It was not a thing that could be described in any language, but it was there. It watched us. It knew us. And I realized with a cold clarity that we had been drawn here for a reason. This was no accident. This was not some random occurrence in a forgotten part of the ocean. This thing, whatever it was, had been waiting for us. And we had been waiting for it too. I could feel its thoughts, its desires. It was like a weight pressing against my mind, a pressure that I couldn't escape. It didn't speak in words. It didn't need to. Its presence was the message. We had opened the door and now it was free. I understood then. This was no ancient relic. It was no forgotten alien artifact. It was an entity, a being that had been trapped for eons, sealed away in this dark, forgotten corner of the universe. And now it was awake. 4.4 The awakening deepens. I had been staring at the door for what felt like hours. My mind was a labyrinth of confusion, fear, and something else, something pulling at the edges of my sanity. I could feel it, the pressure building in my chest, the weight of it pressing down on my lungs like 1,000 tons. Gorman was the first to speak, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We've opened it. We've made contact." I wasn't sure whether he was talking to me or himself, but it didn't matter. There was something in his eyes now, something unrecognizable. His pupils were dilated and the whites of his eyes had taken on a strange, yellowish hue. Was it fear? Or was it something else? The room felt colder despite the heat from the equipment. I could hear the hum of the generators, the low buzz of the lights flickering overhead. Everything was wrong. Helen, standing beside me, hadn't said a word. Her eyes were fixed on the door as well, but there was something different about her expression. She looked empty. Her face was pale, almost ashen, and her lips trembled as if she was struggling to hold back something. The words she had spoken earlier, those whispered fragments of insanity, replayed in my mind. "We are nothing." The echo of her words was too loud in my head, drowning out everything else. Suddenly, there was a loud crack, a sound like something breaking in the distance. I turned to see the door shift just a little, but enough to make my heart race. The gap between the door and the frame widened as if something were moving inside. Something alive. My breath hitched as I took a step back. "Do you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Helen didn't respond, but I could see her trembling now, her fingers twitching involuntarily. Gorman was still fixated on the door, his face drained of color. The air in the room was thick, almost suffocating. I felt a wave of dizziness hit me, my mind spinning, and for a moment I thought I might collapse right there. Then the voice came. It wasn't from any of us. It wasn't even from the door. It came from everywhere. It was a low, rumbling sound, deep and alien, vibrating through the walls, the floor, and my very bones. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, a primal, inescapable pressure. "It is time." The words weren't spoken aloud. They were felt, an impression that seeped into my consciousness, bypassing language, bypassing sense itself. I could hear them in my mind, clearer than my own thoughts, more insistent. "It is time." I didn't know how to react. It was as if the air itself had changed, becoming thicker, heavier. The rift in the door widened again, a dark void now visible behind it, as if the very fabric of space had torn open. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a doorway. It was a portal, a tear in reality itself. "Do you hear it?" I whispered, turning to Helen and Gorman. But they didn't seem to notice. They were lost in a trance, their eyes fixed on the growing rift. I tried to shake them from their stupor, but my movements felt sluggish, as if I were moving through water. I reached for Gorman, but his hand snapped out, grabbing mine with an unnatural strength. His grip was cold, his skin clammy. "We have to open it," he muttered, his voice distant as if he wasn't speaking to me. "We have to let it in." The words sent a chill through me, colder than any physical sensation. I pulled my hand away from him, but his gaze followed me, those wild, unfocused eyes still locked onto me. Something had shifted within him, something irreversible. And then the door moved. It wasn't a gentle shift. It was more like a violent rupture, as if the door was no longer a door at all, but a membrane, a barrier that had held something vast at bay for eons. It pushed outward, an invisible force flooding into the room, filling every corner, every crack. The air felt alive now, crackling with static, electric and heavy. The entity was awakening. I could feel it, sense it, its presence pressing in from all sides, folding into the room, suffocating us. The boundaries between reality and nightmare began to blur. The walls trembled, the lights flickered violently, and the machines started to screech in protest, their circuits frying under the strain of this new force. "Gorman! Helen!" I shouted, but neither of them responded. They were still transfixed, their eyes wide, faces expressionless, as if they had been taken. The rift behind the door grew wider, the darkness expanding, spilling into the room like ink spreading through water. I stumbled back, my pulse racing, every instinct screaming at me to flee, to escape this place. But the door was no longer just a portal. It was a trap. We were already caught in it. We had opened the way for it. A voice, low and guttural, came again, reverberating through my skull, making my teeth rattle. It was incomprehensible, too alien to grasp, but there was one word that I could make out: begin. The room collapsed inward, folding on itself like paper crumbling in the wind. I could feel the floor beneath me tilting, the walls stretching outward. My mind spun, disoriented, overwhelmed by the reality of what was happening. I wasn't sure if I was standing or falling. My body felt weightless. The darkness was consuming us. Not just the room, the very fabric of reality was being devoured. The rift was a wound in the universe, a tear through which something old, something monstrous, was crawling. It was alive in a way that was beyond comprehension. It had no form, no shape, no beginning or end. It was all and nothing, a force older than the stars themselves. And then I saw it, a figure, tall, shadowed, and immense, emerged from the rift. It was more than a figure. It was a presence, a feeling, an ancient awareness that reached into my soul and turned it inside out. It looked at me, and I felt my heart stop. It wasn't looking at me through its eyes. It was looking at me through my own eyes, through my own consciousness. I screamed. The entity, it was no longer something that could be simply seen or understood. It was everywhere, filling the room, the entire station, expanding across the very fabric of existence itself. I felt it invade every cell of my body, every thought I ever had, twisting it, bending it until nothing felt real anymore. It was as though my identity, everything I had once known, was becoming optional. The figure, no, the presence, loomed in front of me, but it wasn't a shape I could comprehend. It was like staring into the abyss itself. Only now the abyss had a voice, a will. It had a desire, and that desire was for us. It was drawing us in one by one. I staggered backward, my legs shaky beneath me. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it, even as my mind screamed at me to look away, to run. But there was nowhere to run. There was no escaping it. The rift, the door, was not just a portal to another place, but to a place beyond time and space. The laws of the universe themselves bent and cracked at its touch. Behind me, I heard a low moan. Gorman was still standing by the door, his body rigid. He had not moved, his gaze still fixed on the void beyond. Helen was in a similar state, her hands trembling, her lips moving soundlessly, as if she were repeating something over and over in her mind, trying to anchor herself to the last threads of sanity. But I knew we had all crossed a point of no return. There was no going back. The thing, if it could even be called that, was not bound by the limitations of the physical world. It was as if the very essence of the station, the walls, the metal, and the air were all dissolving around us. Nothing felt stable. The ground beneath me seemed to shift as if gravity itself had become something malleable, something uncertain. I turned to face Gorman, desperate for something, anything, that could break the trance. "Gorman!" I shouted, but my voice was weak, swallowed by the oppressive force in the room. "We need to leave. We need to close the door." But his expression was vacant, blank. It was as though the man I had once known, the person I had worked alongside for years, had been replaced by something else, something alien. His eyes were no longer his own. They were too wide, too still. He spoke, but his voice was not his own either. "We've unlocked it," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "We've opened the way. There's no going back." His words twisted in my mind, a cold realization creeping in. It was already too late. We had opened the door. We had invited whatever this was into our world. "Gorman?" "No," I whispered, the weight of his words pressing down on me like a vice. But before I could take another step, the presence before us moved. At first, it was imperceptible, like the faintest ripple in the air, a shift of pressure too subtle for the human eye to track. But then, it exploded into motion and I realized it had a shape. The shape of something not meant to be seen. A writhing mass of everything. Fractals within fractals, faces, shapes, and voids within voids, all revolving around a central core that defied description. It was like staring at the sun through a prism, each shard of light and color twisting into incomprehensible patterns. Felt alive, and I felt it in me, its awareness, its hunger. I heard a voice, but not one that came from any living thing. It wasn't even from the entity itself. It was something older, something more primal. The voice reverberated in my skull, not through my ears. "We have waited." It was all I could hear, a persistent hum in my brain, vibrating through my skull, thrumming in my chest. It was not a sound but a feeling, a sensation that crawled under my skin and into my very soul. I staggered back again, my hand gripping the edge of the table to steady myself. My vision blurred, the room spinning as if I were drowning in air. The pressure, it was too much. My body was fighting against the pull of the entity, trying to reject it, but I could feel it gnawing at my edges, my thoughts warping, my reality splitting. The darkness from the rift poured into me like liquid fire, burning through the veil of my consciousness. And then, there was nothing. I don't know how long I had stood there, trapped in the endless spiral of my own mind. But when my senses returned to me, I found myself standing outside the room, alone. The door had closed, no, It had melted into the wall, as if it had never existed. The station was silent. No hum of the machines. No voices. Nothing. I turned, my heart hammering in my chest, only to find that the others were gone. There was no sign of Gorman or Helen. It was as if they had evaporated from existence. I called out their names, but no answer came. The silence pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. What had happened? I stumbled down the corridor, the walls closing in around me. My mind was slipping. I could feel it. The edges of reality were fraying, the world warping, twisting. I looked out the windows, expecting to see the familiar stretch of the deep ocean beyond, but instead, I saw nothing. There was no ocean. There were no stars. There was no sky, just an endless, black void that stretched out into infinity. It was as if the world had been erased. I don't know how long I wandered, lost in the twisted labyrinth of the station, but eventually, I found myself back in the control room. The screens were dead, the computers frozen. The lights flickered erratically, casting long shadows across the empty room. My reflection in the glass was distorted, my face twisted and hollow, as if I, too, were becoming part of the void. I couldn't understand what had happened to us, but I knew one thing for sure. The entity hadn't just opened a door. It had opened us. It had peeled back the layers of our minds, of our world, and left us exposed to something we were never meant to see. We were already dead, and the door, it was still waiting for us to open it again. The world around me continued to distort as I stumbled through the station, unsure of where I was going. The walls were no longer familiar. They had transformed into something alien, something that seemed to breath. Every surface I touched felt like it was made of skin, slick and soft, stretching under my fingertips in ways it shouldn't. The station had become a living thing. It was part of the entity now, part of its influence, its reach. I tried to recall the maps of the station in my mind, the places we had stored our equipment, the lab spaces, the control room, but it felt like I was lost in a labyrinth, every corner shifting, every hallway twisting into something that felt wrong. The sense of dislocation was overwhelming. I thought I could hear voices in the distance, distant echoes of Gorman and Helen, calling to me, but their voices were not their own. They were distorted, stretched thin across the fabric of reality, like a bad radio signal that couldn't quite tune in. Am I dreaming? The question burned through my mind, but even as I thought it, I realized it didn't matter. Dreams didn't feel like this. This was real, and it was something worse than real. It was something beyond comprehension, beyond anything we were meant to encounter. I kept moving, my feet heavy, my breath shallow. I didn't know where I was going anymore, but my instincts, if they could still be trusted, were pushing me forward. There was something else I had to do, something I had to find. The control room door slammed shut behind me, and I turned, startled, my heart pounding. I hadn't even heard anyone come up behind me. No, it wasn't a person at all. It was the door from the rift. It had returned, and it was calling me. I stepped back instinctively, my back hitting the cold wall of the control room. I wanted to run, to flee, but the door was inescapable now. It had become the station, woven itself into the very fabric of the place. It wasn't just some structure made of metal and bolts anymore. It was an extension of the entity, an anchor for its presence, its influence. A low rumbling sound began to emanate from the door, from the air itself. The same unsettling vibration that had filled the station when we first opened it. I could hear the whispering again, that ancient voice in my mind, louder this time, pressing against the walls of my consciousness. It is here. The words were not spoken by the entity, but by everything. The air, the walls, the darkness that had overtaken the station. I reached out, my hand trembling, and placed it on the door. The moment I touched it, a jolt of cold energy shot through me like being struck by lightning. My body seized up and I felt my mind crack, splinter, as if pieces of me were being pulled apart. And then I saw it. A vision, no, a memory, ripped itself from the depths of the rift. It wasn't a memory of this place, this time. It was something older. Something beyond time. I was standing in the ruins of a city, a place that felt familiar but was not. There were people, human or at least what had once been human, scattered across the landscape, their bodies twisted, reshaped into something unrecognizable. Some had tentacles instead of limbs, others had eyes where mouths should have been. They were speaking to each other, but their voices were wrong, garbled, like static from a broken speaker. The ground beneath me was cracked open, and from the fissures, dark tendrils of something, alive, were creeping upward. And above them, looming like a titan in the sky, was the entity, the thing that had opened the door. It hung suspended in the air, not as a singular form, but as an endless mass, a shifting ocean of faces, mouths, eyes. It was everything and nothing. Its true nature was beyond anything I could grasp, but I could feel it, know it. The people below it, they were worshipping it. Their movements were erratic, desperate. Some were crawling, others were pulling themselves through the dirt as if to be closer to it. The entity spoke to them, its voice like thunder, but it was a whisper in my mind. I could hear it all, their devotion, their fear. The very ground was shaking under their feet as the entity consumed everything. It was tearing apart their reality, their sense of self, until they were no longer individuals, no longer human. It was here. It was everywhere. I snapped back to reality with a gasp, my head pounding, my body drenched in cold sweat. I was still standing in front of the door. But now I could hear something else. It was the sound of breathing, not mine, not anyone's. The door was breathing. The rift in the fabric of space was alive, expanding, contracting, as if the universe itself was exhaling. I had to stop this. I had to close it. I ran to the control panel, my hands shaking violently as I tried to activate the emergency systems to initiate the lockdown to reverse the process. But there was nothing. The controls were dead, unresponsive, as if the station itself had been drained of power. The entity was everywhere, and it was draining us. We had opened the door, and now the station, the world itself, was beginning to unravel. There was a sudden crash behind me. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, only to see a figure emerge from the darkness. It was Gorman. His face was twisted, his eyes wide with madness. His skin had turned pale, and his veins were blackened, as if the entity had begun to consume him from the inside. His mouth was open, but no words came out. Instead, there was a low, guttural growl like an animal trapped in agony. "Gorman," I whispered, horrified as he staggered toward me. He reached out a hand, and as he did, I saw something that made my blood freeze. His skin was sloughing off, peeling away in layers, like paper, revealing something beneath. Something not human. I backed away, panic rising in my chest. "No. Gorman, stop." But it was too late. He was already part of it. The entity had taken him, just as it had taken Helen, just as it had taken the station itself. He lunged forward, his hands grasping at my throat. There was no longer any trace of the man I had known, only the hunger, the devouring need that came from the entity. I struggled against his grip, but it was useless. I could feel myself weakening, my vision darkening as the air around me became thick, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. My limbs were going numb. And then, in the moment before everything went black, I heard it again, the voice of the entity, louder now, overwhelming everything. "You have opened the door. There is no escape. There is no closing what has been set in motion." The last thing I saw was the door, the rift, and in its center, the image of the vast, unyielding void, swallowing everything whole. The first thing I noticed when I regained consciousness was the overwhelming silence, the absolute stillness of it. I opened my eyes only to find myself staring at a dull, metallic ceiling. The air smelled like salt water and rot, a familiar stench that made my heart race in panic. I was on the floor, cold, hard metal beneath me, and my mind struggled to make sense of where I was. My body felt heavy, but more than that, it felt wrong. I could barely breathe, and the air tasted metallic, like something had been forced into my lungs. The control room was no longer the familiar place I remembered. It was darker now, the lights flickering as though struggling to stay alive. The equipment was smashed, cables hanging from the ceiling like dead tendrils. The walls had warped in ways that seemed unnatural. They were alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that the station itself had been infected by the entity, its influence was inescapable, and it had slowly consumed everything in its path. I tried to sit up, but my body ached, the muscles stiff and uncooperative. The air felt too thin. I gasped for breath, every inhalation burning my chest. My mind was clouded. I couldn't remember how I got here, what had happened after Gorman attacked me. I could still feel the pressure of his hands around my throat, the overwhelming pull of the entity's presence, but the details of it were slipping away like sand through my fingers. As I struggled to my feet, I noticed something else. There was no sound. No hum of machinery, no distant footsteps, no crackling of the intercoms. There was only the eerie quiet of the station and the sea. The sea outside, pressing against the walls as if it were a living thing trying to breach its confines. I made my way to the observation window. The glass was cracked, but still intact, and as I peered through the jagged fracture, the sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. The ocean had changed. The once serene blue expanse was now a murky, violent mass of swirling black and green. The water churned in unnatural patterns as though it were alive and fighting to escape its bonds. But what was truly horrifying were the shapes moving beneath the surface. Great, dark forms that seemed to glide just out of sight, only to reappear in flashes, tentacles, limbs, eyes monstrous and alien. They were not creatures of the sea that we knew. They were something other. I felt the weight of it. The entity had reached beyond the station. It had infected the ocean, the very fabric of reality itself. And now it was spreading. The walls of the station seemed to groan in response to the movement in the water. It was as if the rift, the door we had opened, had torn a hole not just in space, but in time and existence. The ocean was changing, and in its wake, the world was becoming something unrecognizable. I backed away from the window, my head spinning. The room began to tilt, and I collapsed to my knees, nausea rising in my throat. My thoughts were fragmented, disjointed, but I knew one thing: I had to escape. I had to get out of here before whatever had consumed this place did the same to me. The door to the control room slammed open. I looked up, hoping to see a friendly face, someone still alive, someone who could explain what had happened, what was happening. But what I saw was not human. It was Gorman. But it wasn't Gorman. He was different. His body was thinner, stretched as if his bones had been pulled apart and reassembled in grotesque ways. His eyes were wide and hollow, sunken deep into his skull, and his skin was an unhealthy shade of pale, like the color of death itself. He didn't move like a person. He shuffled forward with jerky, unnatural motions, his hands twitching as if they were not his own. "You're still here?" he rasped, his voice a dry, broken whisper. It was as if the words were being dragged from his throat against his will. He stepped closer, his head tilting at an impossible angle, the expression on his face utterly blank. I tried to stand, but my legs felt like rubber beneath me. "Gorman, what happened to you?" My voice cracked, desperate for any explanation, but I already knew the answer. The entity, the rift, it had taken him. He did not respond. Instead, he reached out, his fingers elongating, stretching toward me with an unnatural speed. I instinctively backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. But the room felt smaller now, as though it were closing in on me. The air grew thicker, heavier, and I could feel the pressure mounting, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I need to escape. I had no choice but to move, to act, to survive. I pushed myself to my feet with a strength I didn't know I had left and ran toward the hallway. I didn't know where I was going, but I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stay with whatever Gorman had become. As I ran, the lights flickered again, casting the hallway in brief flashes of harsh, glaring light. And in those moments, I saw them. There were more figures, more shapes moving through the shadows. Some were humanoid, but many were twisted beyond recognition. Their bodies were fused with metal or stretched grotesquely, limbs bent in impossible angles. Their faces were blank slates, devoid of expression, but I could feel their eyes on me. I could feel them watching. The station was alive, and it was hungry. I stumbled down the hallway, my heart pounding in my ears, my legs screaming in pain as I pushed myself forward. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was always just behind me, reaching for me, pulling me toward it. I reached the elevator and slammed my hand on the panel, praying to God that it would work. But when the doors opened, I found nothing inside. The elevator was empty except for the smell of decay, the scent of something long dead. I didn't have time to think. I jumped inside and pressed the button to take me up to the surface, not knowing if I was even headed in the right direction. As the elevator ascended, I felt a sudden shift in the air. The walls of the shaft seemed to groan, the metal screeching against itself. It was as though the entire station was shifting, twisting, alive, in ways it wasn't meant to be. But I couldn't stop. I had to keep going. The doors opened with a shudder, and I found myself in the observation room. I ran toward the nearest hatch, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the release. With a violent twist, the hatch opened, and I climbed through, pulling myself out onto the surface of the ocean. What I saw was nothing like the world I had known. The sky was dark, a sickly shade of red, the clouds swirling like a storm that had no end. The sea had grown more violent, churning with dark, menacing waves that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The horizon was an endless, distorted expanse of shifting water, and in the distance, I could make out something else, shapes, emerging from the depths. They were moving, rising from the deep, and they were not alone. The creatures from the depths of the ocean, the ones I had seen in my visions, were beginning to surface. And with them came the entity, its presence everywhere, stretching across the sky, over the sea, into the very fabric of reality itself. The world was coming apart, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I had only a few seconds to catch my breath before the next wave of realization hit me. The darkness that surrounded me wasn't just the absence of light. It was thick. It clung to everything, as though the very atmosphere was permeated by something that was not meant to exist. I stood on the surface of the world, but this was no longer the world I had known. The sky above me was like a bruise, swollen with unnatural hues, purples, reds, and sickly oranges swirling in a tumultuous dance. It was the kind of sky that pressed down on you, as though it were determined to swallow you whole. The ocean, too, was different. It wasn't just dark. It was alive. It churned with restless, sentient energy, pulsed as though it was breathing. I could almost hear the deep, guttural sound of it, vibrating through the soles of my boots. I turned my eyes to the horizon, looking out at the vast expanse of water. I expected the familiar sight of the distant landmasses, but there was nothing. The ocean stretched out endlessly, more oppressive than ever. The surface of the water was still in some places, like a mirror, and in others, it bubbled and seethed with activity. But it wasn't just the movement of waves that disturbed me. There were shapes moving beneath the surface, large and almost deliberate. I knew, with a cold certainty, that they weren't the creatures of the deep sea we had studied. No, these were something else. I staggered backward, my pulse quickening, my mouth dry. The memory of the door, of what had happened after I opened it, began to resurface. The rift had torn through space and time, and now the world was beginning to feel like a disjointed puzzle. Pieces scattered, edges frayed. But something more terrifying had happened, too. The very fabric of reality had been altered. The laws of nature that had governed us for millennia were no longer in effect. I could feel it in my bones, like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it harder to breathe. I stumbled towards a rock formation, anything to steady myself. I needed to focus, to try and understand what was happening. As I sat on the jagged edge of the stone, my mind raced. The memories of the station, of the crew, of Gorman came rushing back. He had been the first to fall. I had seen it in his eyes before he attacked me, the unmistakable hunger. His descent into madness had been quick, a symptom of the entity's reach. But what about the others? What had happened to them? The last I saw, they were changing. Their forms were distorted, their minds twisted, and the entity, its influence, was spreading, consuming everything in its path. I needed to find out what had happened to them, if there was anyone left alive. But the further I ventured out into the open, the less I could tell if the world around me was real at all. The landscape was warping, and every step I took felt like it brought me closer to the edge of a nightmare. The sounds of the ocean grew louder, almost deafening now. As I made my way toward a rocky outcrop, the ground beneath my feet began to shake. A low rumble, deep and unsettling, reverberated through the earth. It felt like the very foundations of the planet were cracking, breaking under pressure. I could feel the tension in the air, a terrible pressure building. I couldn't explain it, but the earth itself seemed to groan, like it was being pulled in every direction at once. My hands shot out to steady myself, and I felt the ground beneath me move, as if I were standing on the edge of a great chasm. A shudder ran through me, and the first real surge of panic hit me. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shape rising from the water, impossibly large, like a shadow from some forgotten time. My heart stopped as I took in its form. It wasn't a creature. It was more like a thing, a structure, an alien ruin rising from the depths of the ocean. It had jagged, uneven edges, and the surface was covered in strange symbols, too complex and alien to comprehend. The thing was moving slowly, as though it were waking up from a long slumber. I felt the ground tremble again, this time with greater intensity. The shape rose higher from the water, and I could make out a faint, pulsing glow emanating from within its depths. It was calling to me. No, not just me. It was calling to everyone. I turned away, unable to tear my eyes from it. The sheer scale of it was overwhelming. The realization that I was standing in the presence of something ancient, far beyond human understanding, sent a wave of cold dread through me. This was it. This was the heart of everything. The door we had opened, the entity we had unleashed. And now it was rising from the depths, ready to reshape the world in its image. I stumbled back, my breath shallow, as my mind tried to process what I had just seen. But my feet carried me on, as if some unseen force was pulling me toward the thing in the water. I didn't know what to do, what could be done. There was no escaping it. The world was beyond saving. The air around me began to crackle with energy, as though the atmosphere itself was charged, ready to break apart. I turned back to the horizon and saw more shapes rising from the ocean, more of those alien structures, each one pulsing with the same eerie light. The sea had become a breeding ground for them. Whatever they were everywhere now. I could feel the pressure building. My thoughts became frantic as I realized the truth. The ocean, the earth, the sky, all of it was being rewritten by the entity's will. Reality itself was bending and fracturing, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. In the distance, I saw another figure, a silhouette against the ominous backdrop of the water. I squinted, trying to make sense of it, but then my heart skipped a beat. It was Gorman, or something that used to be him. His body was contorted, elongated, but he was moving toward me with purpose, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. His form was a grotesque parody of the man I had once known. I should have run, but I didn't. I couldn't. I stood frozen as he drew closer. The air around him shimmered, distorting as though reality itself was struggling to contain the thing that had once been human. "It's too late," he rasped, his voice distorted as though several voices were speaking at once. "We've all become part of it. You'll see soon enough." His words were a warning, but they didn't comfort me. Instead, they made my heart sink deeper into my chest. He was lost like the others. We all were. The entity had taken everything, our bodies, our minds, our souls. And now it was claiming the world itself. I turned and ran, but my legs felt weak, my body unsteady. I didn't know where I was going anymore. It didn't matter. The surface was no sanctuary. The world was unraveling, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I could hear the distant crash of waves, the creak of the earth, the unnatural hum in the air. As I looked back one last time, I saw the shadows stretching across the sky. The shapes in the water were closing in, and the thing rising from the depths had reached its full height, casting an immense shadow over the land. And then there was nothing but silence. I don't know how much time has passed since I last saw the figures rise from the ocean. How long it's been since the ground trembled beneath my feet and the horizon was no longer a place of refuge but a theater for horrors that defied explanation. The world is fractured. I don't know if there's anyone left. I don't know if there's any world left. The last thing I remember clearly is running. Running from Gorman, running from the twisted remains of my crew. But the world around me was changing. The oceans were filled with those alien structures rising from the depths like titans. The sky was no longer the sky, it was a shifting mass of colors, a reflection of the cosmic nightmare we had unlocked when we opened the cursed door. The rules of time and space themselves seemed to have collapsed, distorted by the entity that had awoken. I ran, but not because I thought I could escape. I ran because it was the only thing I could do. I ran until my legs gave out, until the exhaustion set in and I collapsed. And that's when it happened. I woke up here, wherever here is. The place I now find myself in defies description. It's neither the earth I once knew nor any reality I've ever encountered. The laws of physics, the flow of time, the boundaries of space, they've all been twisted into something else. The landscape around me shifts constantly, like the surface of a liquid. Sometimes it seems to ripple with the contours of the land I once knew, but then it's gone, replaced by something entirely alien, a place that doesn't belong to any known dimension. I can still hear the ocean's roar, though the water is no longer where it should be. I hear it in the distance, an eternal, booming sound that doesn't seem to come from any particular direction. It's omnipresent. Like everything else, it has become part of the entity's design. The ocean, the sky, the land, it's all the same now, all melding together into a single, incomprehensible entity. I have seen them too. The other survivors, or what was left of them. At first, I thought I was alone, but no, I am never alone. Gorman, if it's still him, appears sometimes, his grotesque form rising from the shadowed corners of this nightmarish realm. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. His presence is enough to remind me that we are all part of this now. We are part of something far older, far greater than any of us could have ever imagined. I can feel it. The entity. The one we awakened. It's everywhere now. In the air. In the ground. In the very essence of this fractured reality. I don't know its name. I don't think it has one. It is timeless. It is ancient. It is the darkness before existence itself. The great force that shaped the cosmos before we ever took our first breath. I know it watches me. And I know it's been waiting for this moment. For me. For all of us. The doors we opened didn't just shatter our world, they were never meant to remain closed. We were always meant to open them. We were always meant to bring it into the light, to make it real. And now, the world as we know it is unraveling. I think about the mission, the protocol we were supposed to follow, and it all feels so absurd now. All the science, all the planning, all the calculations. We had no idea. We had no idea that what we were dealing with wasn't just an experiment. It was the end. The beginning. A cosmic cycle unfolding. I've seen the sky change before my eyes, shifting colors and growing darker, as though the very concept of day and night has become irrelevant. The stars above me don't twinkle. They burn. They burn with an unnatural intensity, their shapes changing, becoming something unfamiliar. I remember the door. The door we found in the abyss. The door that shouldn't have been opened. I see it still. In the depths of my mind, I see it, its edges glimmering, its surface covered in the alien runes that made my head ache just to look at. It was never meant to be opened. It wasn't a door, it was a seal. A seal on a force far older than anything we could comprehend. And now it's free. I wonder if anyone else will survive this. But even if they do, I know it won't matter. There will be no returning to what was. There will be no salvation. We've crossed the threshold. We've broken the chains that held this reality in place. And in the end, it doesn't matter how far I run. How far anyone runs. The world is gone. And all that remains is the entity, the infinite force that was always meant to be. The door was just the beginning. Now it is everywhere. I think I am starting to understand what it wants. What it needs. What we all are to it. And it is hungry. Thank you for descending into the dark with us. If this story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to like the video, it helps keep the shadows alive. Subscribe to SpookyShade for more tales from the edge of fear, the unknown, and the unspeakable. New horrors are always waiting, just beyond the veil. Until next time, stay curious and stay in the light.